Hi, Davide here, and welcome back to my channel, The Impertinent Collector. And let me share with you some uncomfortable development. In the last few years, I've been affected by some sort of a mysterious condition that manifests itself with sharp pain in the lower abdomen, sometimes sharp pain in the upper chest, some other times shortness of breath, and also anxiety attacks. Oh my God, but that sounds terrible. Yes, and if it's not all, sometime I hit by a bout of sadness and melancholy that keeps me incapacitated and unable to make a decision for days and days. Oh, but I spent time to carefully analyzing the symptoms and the circumstances of their appearance. And I finally come to the conclusion that I am affected by a new psychological disorder that I labeled collector syndrome. Yes, and something tells me that it does not affect the collectors. But here are the 7 scenarios where this mysterious syndrome makes its sudden appearance. Number 1, you find something you really like and you can't afford it. Oh, but listen to me, there is worse. You find something you really like and you can afford it, but there are other priorities in the way that are preventing you from going ahead with your purchase. You have found something you really like, you can afford it, but is expensive, and you are questioning yourself if the object is worth the money. Money. Yes, that's what caused this disorder. Number 4, you find something you really like. You have the money, you are ready to purchase, but you are traveling overseas and you are not familiar and you don't have the time to learn what are the export rules of that country and the import rules of your own country of residence for that particular item. So it's a logistical problem. Number 5, you have something in your collection that is too valuable to be kept at home when you can actually enjoy it. And so for security, you keep it in a vault and you can't enjoy it. Number 6, this is a terrible one. Somebody likes an item in your collection and is asking you if you would be interested in selling it. My God, it's not about money, but it is about money. When will you ever be able to find somebody who is willing to make you an offer And of course, it's not about what you paid. It's what you think is worth and what is prepared to pay. And then finally, number 7, what I called the monster, the most psychological, violent scenario. You are basically have something in your collection that by its own nature cannot be owned and enjoyed at the same time. It sounds like a conundrum, but it is in reality very simple. If you own it, you can't enjoy it. And if you enjoy it, you no longer own it. Well, welcome to the incredibly frustrating world of collector's wine. Yes, that's the item that we are talking about. They are expensive, they grow in value. Everybody talks about them like they are like the top of status symbols because it requires money to purchase it, the opportunity because they are extremely rare, but also the guts to open it and to enjoy it with people like you who can fully understand and appreciate what you are serving. And here I am, an Italian living in Australia, a collector. And let me tell you, there is nothing more iconic in terms of Australian wine than this one here. Ladies and gentlemen, I'll introduce you the Grange Hermitage from Penfolds, vintage 2013. Still in its case, sealed like the tomb of Tutankhamun before Edward Carter broke the seal. And there it is, King Tut in his own sarcophagus, surrounded by all the objects that will serve him when he will come back to life. And the wine is very much alive. And this particular wine that retails in excess of $1,000 per bottle is something that is divine. It is, in fact, the most valuable wine that Australia produces and is being considered for winning the competition as one of the top wine in the world. Red wines, of course, top, 100 points, depending on the vintage. We are at the peak. But also, this particular wine, is very close to me. I have a very strong feeling for this wine for a very long time because I knew the history. Australia, together with New Zealand, Chile, Argentina, and California, if you want, are part of the new world in terms of wine producer. And back in Italy, in France, people laughed them off for years for the light wines until they start producing wines that were more and more complex, more and more sophisticated, and they started to challenging the top French wine across the world in the top restaurants and with the top collectors. So that was the warning bell. We now have serious competition. We can no longer laughed them off. And for me, there is nothing more old world than me, Italian born and raised and educated, with my family history of culture and food and travels and connections with the most interesting people. And yet here we have a wine that is the best wine that Australia produces and is one of the top wines. But there is also other reason why I found this wine irresistible. Because the chief winemaker of Penfolds in the 1940s, by the name of Max Schubert, was tasked by the Penfolds family to create better and better wines. And so he traveled across Europe. And he had the opportunity to stop in France and to taste the top wine. And we are talking about the wine of Chateau Margaux and the famous Chateau Lafite Rothschild. Really the top Bordeaux and the top wines in the world, unsurpassed. And he thought that Penfolds in Southern Australia, they could produce something that was equivalent to the Chateau Lafite, to the Chateau Margaux, to the Romano Conti. Would you believe it? The arrogance and the audacity of this man. And so he put together a team and they start working for 3 years to produce a wine that he labeled Grange Hermitage. And after a number of years and 3 years when he was like bottled and fermenting and growing, he called the board of Penfolds and all the experts within the company, and they did the first wine testing. And the wine was considered awful. It didn't turn up well. And the board instructed Max Schubert to stop the production of the Grange Hermitage. And they labeled that as a failed experiment. But our friend Max knew better. He realized that those were just bureaucrats, people maybe holding shares, maybe holding power within the company, people that themselves had reached a glass ceiling that they thought could not be broken by any Australian wine. And what he did? He kept producing Grange Hermitage secretly for 3 years. And then one day he tested the wine with some close associates of his that were supporting him. And then he called back the board, he told them, and when they tested the wine, they realized that Max was right all along, and that they had struck gold with this wine that now is matching the top Bordeaux wine from France. So to me, the story of the outsider, the guy that has been told no by the board and decided to take the risk, the gamble, professionally, as a human being, financially, to go and say, No, I will do it anyway behind your back, and you will see. And they did see. So that story was already appealing. But there is another side story that I thought really fascinating. My family in Italy were well known for throwing fabulous party where all the right people were present and were like networking and connecting in the best possible surrounding with the best of food and the finest wine. Because I've never been a wine connoisseur myself, or didn't have wine interest myself. But my dad would source the wine together with some friends from the best cellars across Italy and France. And some of these cellars, including the one with the Romani Conti, you couldn't go in unless it was by invitation only, you had a special connection. And the same is true for the Chateau Margaux, Chateau Lafite. Now, for instance, it's totally impossible to acquire any of this wine because the restaurant world has grown so powerful that everything is immediately scooped up for vintage that haven't happened yet. They'll buy the entire production. So that's how it works, because the markup in a restaurant, in the top restaurant in Paris, in Monte Carlo, but also in Tokyo, in Dubai, in New York, is extraordinary. You can sell $1,000 or $2,000 bottle of wine that you bought directly from the winemaker 10 times. And that is really the power that they have, because it's the power of money of the people who can consume that wine. But in these parties, when you would have bankers, lawyers, but also artists, musicians, ambassadors, people from overseas, designers, it was quite something. Well, my dad would have wine, and we are talking about a proper dinner at home for around 50 people. And 50 people who knew what they were eating and they knew what they were drinking. But my dad had this trick up his sleeves. And it was also a way to say, I don't have a chip on my shoulder, I'm gonna test you. So all the wine was fantastic. There was a lot of champagne. There were all sorts of white and red wine. But my dad had 6 bottles of super exquisite and super expensive wine that was decanted and poured into these 5 carafes that were wandering around with the waiters, with the glass and the carafe. And nobody knew what they were drinking. And for my dad, the satisfaction was to wait until one of the guests would look for him and say, my God, Oscar, what a night. Fantastic people. And the food was extraordinary. But what was in that carafe that I saw passing? I just had a sip and I thought, I must know what that wine was. That's when my dad knew that the person understood and appreciated. And then he would take it into the kitchen when he had the 6 empty bottles with the cork to show them. And then they would say this is what it is. How did you get it? How can I have it? Do you still have some for you that I can get? So that is the background. And I found myself having dinner at my friend Colin in Sydney, who himself is a wine lover, a wine connoisseur, and a wine collector. With the difference that Colin and Theo are primarily into vintage champagne. I'm not into champagne myself, and I'm certainly not into vintage champagne. And so that's not my things. But at his party, at his events, you always have exquisite food, exquisite wine, exquisite dessert, you name it, he could serve you the best of tea that is coming from a secret reserve in the middle of nowhere in China. So everything is the best. And one night that I was having dinner with other people there, I saw this carafe, this decanter with the wine. And so I asked, can we have a drink? And he said, yes, please help yourself, as we are walking around with a canapé. And so I had a sip of this wine in this carafe. And he hit me. He hit me on the lips. He hit me on the inside of the lips. He hit me on the tongue. He hit me on the palate. He hit me on the throat. He hit me on the nose. He was oily. He was like nectarine. And he was, for all this ridiculous description that you have on the label of this bottle of wine, fruity with a touch of strawberry, nutty with a undercover of wood, bollocks. But that wine really had it all. I quickly rushed back to the kitchen and I say, for God's sake, Colin, what was in that decanter? And Colin, very much like my dad, with pride, showed me the bottle of Grange. It was the first time I ever tasted Grange. And I said, Colin, my God, how much is this wine? I have to find out if I could afford it. And he said to me, I'm a VIP, I buy directly from Penfolds. Next time, when they offer the next vintage, because it goes up very quickly, starting in Australia and then internationally, I let you know. And of course, when the opportunity came to buy 2013 vintage, I went for it. And I bought not 6, but 12 bottles. I'm sorry, I had to have it. And so now I'm stuck in this dilemma where I own it, but I can't enjoy it. My glass is empty, and so is my decanter. And the price is going up. And I could sell it for profit, and that profit will grow over time. And in fact, you say it like this, but he stays in his own box and in his own vintage, in his own wine fridge at the perfect temperature. This is the first time I took it out the box, but I can't really open the case, like how our Carter did with the tomb of Tutankhamun. And so this is the story of this that I call a collector's syndrome that affects not only collectors, but when we go down to wine, the real things, and the world that is around, I want to leave you with probably what is an historical fake, inaccurate, but you have to take it as a life lesson. It is said that when Michelangelo was commissioned the Sistine Chapel by the Pope Julius II. The Pope, who was an art lover and took a long time to select the painter who would do it, kept asking him for the prospect, for the drawing, for the ideas, and he kept interfering with Michelangelo. And Michelangelo had to change his plans many times. And one late night, he found himself in a tavern and he asked for some wine. And so the host arrived and poured in some wine, and the wine was disgusting. And so Michelangelo said, "This wine is awful." And then the host said like, "Oh, let me get wine from a different cask." He got it again from the other cask, he poured it, and he said, "What about this one here?" And Michelangelo was really upset because of the Pope and because of the frustration with the Sistine Chapel that wasn't progressing. He said, like, "This wine is vinegar." And the host, that was the owner of the land that was producing the wine in Rome, says like, "How dare you, you miserable man." Michelangelo wasn't well known. He was always dirty, poorly dressed. Nobody knew who he was. You say like, "You beggar, how dare you calling my wine vinegar?" And he poured some of the wine in his own cup and he drank it in front of him. And he spit it out. He said, "Come with me." He took it downstairs in the cellar where they had the cask of the wine. And in front of Michelangelo, took an axe and smashed the cask. And he said to him, "When the wine is vinegar, we don't drink it, we throw it." And this experience was so strong in the mind of Michelangelo that he went back to the Sistine Chapel that night, he locked the door, and the following morning he told the Pope Julius II that he was no longer allowed in until he was finished. And so he could fire him on the spot or wait until he was completed. And in all this, in the tavern, when so many people were drinking their awful wine and never complained, there is in the Sistine Chapel a scene when Noah from the ark is painted drunk. And there is a lot of symbolism in there. And so, when you're looking at your life, it doesn't matter about the wine. The wine is just an allegory of what life will throw at us. If it's vinegar, smash the cask and move on. Don't serve it to others, even if the drunken customers wouldn't know any better. And this is my story, and the story of my Penfolds Grange Hermitage. Way more than wine is about life.